Today's topic is narcissists are infuriated when they are forced to face the music, pay the price, endure the karma of their own misconduct. And who am I to talk about this? My name is Sam Vakni and I'm the author of Malignant Self-Love, Narcissism Revisited. I'm a current professor of clinical psychology and business management in CIAPS in Cambridge, United Kingdom, and a former visiting professor of psychology, personality psychology, in Southern Federal University in Rostov-on-Don, in the Russian Federation, in Europe, on this planet, on the Milky Way galaxy. Okay, I hope that I succeeded to locate myself sufficiently accurately. It's just that people keep abusing them. Abusive girlfriends, abusive business partners, abusive spouses, abusive friends. Everyone around them takes advantage of them, humiliates them, attacks them, and they're angelic. They're virginal. It's a vomitary orgy of self-pity. Nothing is more pathetic, nothing is more revolting than a covert narcissist claiming the high moral ground. Nothing is more pathetic, nothing is more revolting than an overt, grandiose narcissist claiming victimhood. Nothing. Narcissists are infuriated when they are finally made to pay for their misbehavior, crimes, abuse, bad choices, and wicked comport or behavior. They hate it. They hate the fact that their actions have consequences, that their choices have adverse outcomes, that punishment is coming, that karma is ineluctable. They hate this. They live in la la land.
The narcissist in your life has already sold their soul to the devil, and you just witnessed the transaction happen right in front of you without even knowing it.
They live in a fantasy within which their actions have no consequences. They can make choices and decisions that affect other people and remain insulated, immune from any payback. So when the narcissist is forced to face the music and pay the price, the narcissist denies everything. Narcissist reframes his or her choices and actions. His or her, half of all narcissists are women. The narcissist would say, I had no choice. Or they would say, they made me do it. Or they would say, I'm being punished because I've been boundaried, because I've exposed the other party. So they shift the blame. This is called alloplastic defense. They blame everyone and everything for the enormous nuclear impact they have had on everyone around them, for the black hole that they have become. They blame everything and everyone with one exception. Themselves, of course.
You know, people often underestimate the weight of their suffering. They think pain is pointless. But that's a lie, a deeply dangerous one. The truth is, your suffering might just be the loudest message the universe has ever spoken into someone else's life. You didn't come into that narcissist world by accident. You were sent. You, with your compassion, your boundaries, your refusal to break, were the final opportunity they had to confront the monster within themselves. You were not chosen by chance. You were placed with purpose. And the sooner you understand that, the more power you'll reclaim from the chaos you were thrown into. People often stumble through life believing that everything that happens is random, that the pain, the betrayal, the emotional manipulation, it's all just some twisted lottery they happen to lose. But that's a very naive and superficial way to interpret your suffering. Because suffering, especially the kind that arises from a deeply toxic dynamic, especially with someone narcissistic, is rarely meaningless. It is heavy. It is structured. It serves a purpose, if not for the one who inflicts it, then for the one who endures it. When you walked into that person's life, you didn't come in as a blank slate. You came in with a heart that was open, that was capable of love, of grace, of seeing the best in people. And that's what made you dangerous to them. Not because you had some sort of power they wanted to possess, although they might have convinced you of that at first, but because you carried something sacred, the reflection of what they were not. The presence of someone authentic is often the most agonizing thing for someone deeply inauthentic. And so the friction began, not because you did something wrong, but because who you were was a challenge to who they refused to become.
They are the victims. They claim victimhood as a kind of badge of honor, an organizing principle which explains their lives, imbues their existence with meaning and sense and direction and goals. They are victims, and by virtue of being victims, they are entitled to special treatment. They have special rights. They're not to blame, ever. They're not responsible, ever. They're not sorry, never. And when they do apologize, it's half-hearted, backhanded, and subterranean. It's not an apology. They're never to blame. They're always to be pitied. They seek pity because they leverage pity to manipulate you. They invade your empathy and turn it against you. They compromise your affection, your compassion, your positive emotions, your essential nobility of mind. They compromise this, they corrupt it, and they use it against you.
Think about the last time they hurt you. Remember how effortlessly they shifted the blame onto you, how they managed to make you feel like you were the crazy one for bringing up their behavior. That was beyond manipulation. That was someone intentionally operating from a place where their spiritual connection has been severed, where divine truth itself has been sacrificed for that kind of control they were establishing. You were watching someone who has already made the ultimate trade with darkness, someone who has turned their back on the light of their soul.
They install themselves within your mind and they never let go. And this kind of narcissists lash out at their tormentors. They claim to be tortured, abused, mistreated, maltreated. They're on camera, whining and moaning. It's a modus operandi. That's the way they operate. That's the way they operate. They're moaning, they're whining, they're despicable and repulsive, complaining. These are the bridgeheads on the way to invading your mind, compromising your essence, your being state, coercing you to fulfill maternal roles, doing whatever they want with you within an ever-shifting shared fantasy. This is the bridgehead, the pity they provoke in you, the empathy that resonates with their false narrative. This is the bridgehead. Be careful. It's always D-Day with a narcissist. They lash out at people because they claim to be on the right side of history, acting the right way. They have never transgressed. They have never regretted anything. They are impeccable. They are immaculate. They are also immutable. This denial of who they truly are, this denial, this repression of their wicked impulses, this compounds their troubles because they externalize aggression, they act out, they lose it, they become clinically psychotic. You can see it in their eyes. Their eyes are shining bright, glassy, not human almost. So this fury, this furnace, this volcano inside them that is erupting, this pushes them to act in ways which they regret for having been caught.
There is something profoundly spiritual about being sent into darkness with light in your hands. And whether you realize it or not, you were sent not for punishment, but for purpose. You see, narcissists do not respond to kindness the way healthy people do. They see kindness as weakness. They interpret empathy as naivety. But beneath all their arrogance, there's a hollow echo of fear. They know somewhere deep within them that they are losing touch with humanity. And when someone walks into their life radiating what they've spent years denying, it shakes them, it threatens them, it exposes them. This is why your presence triggered so much chaos. You weren't just another person they could manipulate, you were the mirror. You were the interruption, the one who didn't flinch when they pushed, the one who stayed rooted while they tried to uproot everything sacred. And make no mistake, that resistance was not random. That strength was not accidental. It was forged, sometimes over years, sometimes through tears, sometimes in silence, but it was there, and it was used. There are moments in life when you become the very thing that forces someone to choose, to finally confront the reality of who they are, or to destroy anything that reminds them of it. And narcissists, more often than not, choose destruction. They don't want to change. They want to control. And when control is no longer possible, they escalate, they slander, they twist narratives. But that choice they made to reject you, to harm you, to sabotage something that was offered in sincerity, that choice is on them. Your presence didn't make them worse. It revealed who they were already becoming.
This places them very often in penitentiaries, incarceration. They pay the price. They escalate because they think by escalating and by lying through their teeth about who they are, by claiming to be victims when actually they are narcissists, by claiming the high moral ground when actually they are overt, grandiose narcissists and even psychopathic narcissists. They think that by pulling the wool over everyone's eyes, by deceiving everyone, they can get away with it. And the problem is they often do. People are gullible. People assume the best about other people. People want to believe in a universe of justice, structure, and the narcissist caters to these needs by pretending that he is on your side, on the right side, where you belong as well. He resonates with his requirements of justice. Narcissists get away with it all the time.
Maybe it was that chilling moment when you realized they could watch you cry and feel absolutely nothing, as if their heart had been spiritually sealed. These are not just random acts of cruelty. This is not just psychological. These are predictable behaviors of someone whose soul has been compromised, someone who has entered into the realm of darkness where only the demonic forces rule. I'm not saying all of this just to create hype. This is true spiritual warfare, and once you understand it, everything about their behavior starts to make perfect sense.
Ultimately, most of the time, they end up self-destructive, being self-destructive. Ultimately, they bring their own calamity and catastrophe and punishment on their heads. They are the engineers of their karma. They are the scientists who put in motion their own demise, their own payback. They are responsible for everything that has ever happened to them. Never mind the lies they're telling you. They've never been on the receiving end. They made it happen. But they get away with it most of the time, until the final curtain.
You were not placed in their life to fix them. That's not your responsibility. You were placed there as a final opportunity, a final lesson, a divine checkmate. And the tragedy is not that they lost you. The tragedy is that they lost the last person who was willing to love them honestly. You may have thought you were just trying to help, just trying to support, just trying to love them through their brokenness. But in reality, you were standing at the edge of their self-destruction, waving the last red flag before the fall. And that flag wasn't made of rage or revenge. It was made of truth, of love with boundaries, of compassion that doesn't fold to abuse. The placement of your soul in that dynamic was not a mistake. And that's why the experience left such a deep mark. It was spiritual warfare. A battle not just of personalities, but of principles. It wasn't about who was right or wrong. It was about who would rise and who would remain chained. You were sent as a witness, a symbol, a final call to transformation. Whether they answered that call or not has nothing to do with your value. Your presence was the signal. Your exit was the consequence. And everything in between was the space for repentance they never claimed. Your empathy was the mirror meant to expose their darkness. And that's the piece most people overlook when they find themselves entangled with a narcissist. It's easy to look back and blame yourself for caring too much, for being too available, too forgiving, too loyal. But those traits weren't flaws. They were evidence of your depth, your integrity, your humanity. In a world where people armor themselves with indifference and emotional distance, your willingness to feel, to actually feel, was disruptive to someone who had long abandoned that part of themselves. The narcissist doesn't fear confrontation nearly as much as they fear reflection. What terrifies them is the quiet presence of someone who sees through the performance, someone who isn't seduced by the facade, someone who listens not just to what is said, but to what is not. That's what your empathy did. It stripped away their illusions. It held up an emotional mirror, not through criticism or conflict, but through consistency, presence, compassion. You didn't need to expose them with your words. Your spirit did it on its own. And that's why they began to distort the dynamic. That's why you were slowly made to feel like the villain, the unstable one, the one who overreacted, because you weren't playing the role they needed you to play. They wanted a reflection that flattered them, not one that confronted them. But your empathy was not shallow. It was real. It noticed things. It picked up on contradictions. It remembered how they spoke on day 1 versus day 30. It saw through the charm, through the shifts, through the mask. And instead of echoing back admiration, it echoed back truth. And truth is a devastating thing to someone built on lies. Narcissists construct identities like fortresses. They gather compliments, attention, success stories, and use them as bricks to build an image. But your empathy didn't worship the image. It sought the person. It looked deeper. And when it couldn't find consistency, when it found manipulation instead of honesty, wounds instead of depth, fear instead of courage, it didn't turn away, at least not immediately. It leaned in. And that's when the war began. Because to the narcissist, empathy is not compassion. It is a threat. It is the thing that sees what they've hidden. And once seen, their power begins to unravel. That's the strange paradox. Your greatest gift was also what triggered their defenses the most. You didn't come in with judgment or control. You came in with understanding. And yet that understanding didn't feel safe to them because it saw everything: the mask, the insecurity, the rage, the emptiness. And instead of validating their fantasy, your empathy exposed the void they refused to acknowledge. That's the kind of confrontation a narcissist cannot tolerate, the confrontation of being known. And so they fought back, not through honesty, but through distortion. They rewrote the story.
They're charming. They're nice, they're kind, they're smiling, they're compassionate, they're understanding, and it's all fake. Totally fake. And they're persistent at this act. They have thespian skills. They play the wounded healer and the wounded child. They cater to your maternal instincts, even if you're a male, to your parental instincts. They trigger you to protect them. to understand them, to coddle them, to cuddle them, to hug them, to afford them comfort and absolution, ultimately. This superficial charm, they deploy it without any trepidation or hesitation or inhibition. They swamp you and inundate you with this charm. And this allows for plausible deniability. Whatever they do, they can disown. They can misattribute to someone else. They can project. They can split. They can lie through their teeth. They can do anything they want. They can be as Machiavellian and manipulative as they wish because they are charming. I'm an innocent, innocuous babe in the woods. I'm an eternal victim. I'm always being victimized. And I don't know why. I don't know why I'm being targeted so persistently by so many dozens of people across decades. I don't know why this is happening to me. Poor me. Poor me. And the narcissist floods you with details. The more, the better. Recent studies have shown that when someone is too detailed, they're lying. And the narcissist is nothing if not a details person. In the case of the narcissist, he believes his own lies. She believes her own fantasies. They're committed and invested emotionally in the fantasy. So they confabulate, actually. But the confabulation is a close cousin of lying, and so it is full of details. And they inundate you with these details, not allowing you to stand back, not letting you exercise critical thinking. They nitpick, they hair split, they analyze semantics and semiotics, they argue on the meaning of words, they distort and mutilate and rape language itself. And they use flying monkeys, delay tactics, an intimidating aura, outlandish charges and counterclaims, crazy making, acting out. It's all disorienting. You feel as if you were trapped in some kind of dreamscape, a nightmare which you cannot wake up from.
This is about someone who has made changes how they interact with divine truth itself. This is not just about somebody who is selfish or has a big ego. This is about someone who has made a conscious choice to prioritize their false self over their soul's connection to higher truth. When I say they have made a deal with the devil, I'm talking about the pivotal moment when they decided that being spiritually authentic was too risky, too vulnerable, and too dangerous. So what did they do? They created this elaborate facade, this false version of themselves that feels safer and more powerful. But maintaining this facade requires them to make spiritual sacrifices that would horrify you and me. That would horrify most souls. You see, when I talk about a narcissist making a deal with the devil, I'm talking about a spiritual contract they make with the darkest aspects of their own being. And this contract gets signed the moment they decide that their ego is more important than their soul. This is the moment they choose the illusion of earthly power over genuine divine connection.
And the only guide through this dystopian universe is the narcissist. The narcissist induces chaos in your mind and immunity to the consequences of their actions. They are parts of grandiosity. The narcissist's cognitive distortion is rejection of reality. He abjures and he abdicates reality. He adopts fantasy. Never mind that they keep falling time and again into the traps of their own dysfunction and mental illness. They would still claim to be above it all, exonerated.
They needed to make you the unstable one. They needed to redefine your empathy as weakness, as naivety, as dysfunction. Because if they didn't, they would have to accept the truth that your presence made obvious that something inside them was deeply broken. But instead of facing that, they tried to break you instead. Because in their mind, if they can silence the mirror, they can escape the reflection. But the truth doesn't disappear just because someone refuses to face it. It lingers, it echoes, and it burns in silence. You weren't too emotional. You weren't too sensitive. You were accurate. Your emotional intelligence was picking up on the spiritual rot they spent years trying to cover.
Safe when they are in control. Maybe they learn that spiritual vulnerability equals danger. So, what do? They create this spiritual armor, this false version of themselves that feels untouchable by divine truth. But creating this false self requires them to make their first deal with spiritual darkness. They have to agree to disconnect from their authentic soul. They have to promise to never show their true authentic self, their true divine nature. They have to commit to always being right, always being superior, better than others, and always being in control. And what is the price, you ask? They give up their ability to truly connect with other people on a spiritual as well as on an emotional level. Now, you may be wondering, why would any soul make such a terrible trade? The answer lies in spiritual survival. In that moment, disconnecting from their authentic self feels like the only way to protect their wounded soul. The narcissist looks at this deal and thinks they are getting divine power without divine responsibility. They think they are going to get unlimited admiration, control, or power over others. They think they found the shortcut to superiority without doing the inner work. In simple words, they choose easy over right. And what I'm sharing with you is not a justification, it is an explanation, because most survivors who experience childhood trauma, who experience abuse, who are not treated well, end up being empaths, right? Had trauma been the cause, then every child of a narcissistic parent would have turned into an evil monster. But that rarely happens. It's all about the choice. It's all about the sacrifice they make. It's all about what they choose to repeat and reinforce, and that is what becomes their character, which is what we call personality. Just like any deal with dark forces, with demons, the spiritual terms get worse over time. What starts as a simple trade turns into a lifetime of escalating spiritual debt.
Within this fantasy, he is irresistibly lovable. He's omnipresent. It's a private religion. And so, like God himself, the narcissist is immune to the consequences of his actions because he knows best, more than you, definitely.
They couldn't play the victim when your heart didn't buy the act. You made the lie harder to believe even for them. And that's why they tried to erase you, because they couldn't erase what your empathy revealed.
Let me show you how this progression actually unfolds on a soul level. The first spiritual payment is their divine authenticity. We all have it. They can no longer access their real soul or their true divine purpose. Everything becomes a performance. Every interaction becomes a transaction because everything is transactional. Every relationship becomes a tool for feeding their ego rather than nourishing their spirit. The second spiritual payment is their divine empathy. We all have that as well. To maintain this false self, they have to shut down their ability to truly feel what others experience. They cannot afford to care about your pain, your suffering, because acknowledging your agony may reveal the spiritual wound they are hiding from themselves. The third spiritual payment is their inner peace. Living disconnected from your soul is spiritually exhausting. It comes at a cost. The narcissist has to constantly guard against any moment of genuine connection, which may crack the facade. And that's the reason why they hate vulnerability. They become extremely paranoid that someone, you in this case, may see through to their wounded soul. And that's why you become their worst nightmare the moment you do. When the narcissist knows you know, what do? They start stepping back. They start discarding you. They start ghosting you because they know they have no power over you anymore. And they feel really ashamed of themselves. More so, they feel like a failure. The fourth spiritual payment is their divine relationships. Real intimacy becomes impossible because intimacy requires soul level vulnerability. And vulnerability is exactly what they traded away in their deal with the devil. Yes, they were surrounded by people, but spiritually isolated from every soul around them. And finally, the ultimate spiritual payment is their connection to divine truth itself. They become so invested in their false narrative, in their false self, that they lose the ability to distinguish between spiritual truth and their illusions. They start believing their own lies.
This impunity is part of his grandiosity. The assumption that nothing bad will ever happen to him, no matter what he does. That no one will catch up to him. Catch me if you can. No one will catch up to him. He will never pay the price. He's a happy-go-lucky. He cruises through life, traverses life, and nothing touches him. He's a Teflon Don, if you wish. And this is part of the grandiosity. So when the narcissist is exposed, when the narcissist is penalized, his grandiosity crumbles. He's challenged. Is undermined. He can no longer maintain the inflated, fantastic self-image and self-perception that is his only defense against the reservoir of shame, life-threatening shame inside himself. The narcissist, first and foremost, deceives himself, lies to himself. He needs to convince himself that he is not the shameful, unlovable, inadequate, stupid, ugly person that he's been led to believe that he is early on in his childhood. This shame, this self-rejection, this self-loathing, this self-hatred implanted in the narcissist by his parents, usually, peers, role models. This is there, contained, barely contained. And the narcissist compensates for this with the false self grandiosity. And when he's exposed, when he is punished, when he's taken down, when he is mocked and ridiculed, when he is criticized, and he feels that his grandiosity is gone, deactivated, and there it is, in full view, his shame, his disgrace, his guilt, his remorse, his self-rejection and self-loathing and self-hatred and self-destruction and self-trashing. And he feels annihilated. He feels about to die. It's a suicidal experience. And it is a narcissistic injury or even mortification. When faced with this, the narcissist's initial reaction is what we call negative affects. Enormous rage, enormous all-consuming rage, followed with hatred on the close heels of envy. Narcissist cannot control these negative affects. He is overwhelmed by them. He develops a borderline dynamic. All his defenses are down. He decompensates. And so he becomes clinically, for a while, a borderline. They envy me. I'm the butt and the target of malign intent and malign planning, maliciousness, wickedness. I am the lamb, the sacrificial lamb. I'm the scapegoat. I'm the innocent. I'm the babe in the woods. And I'm surrounded by the forces of evil and darkness. Stephen King wise. That's the external solution. Thereby self-aggrandizing as a victim. Self-aggrandizing as a pro-social moral being. Everyone around the narcissist is morally decrepit and corrupt, and the narcissist is actually the reification and embodiment of good, saintly, angelic. That's one solution, the external solution. But the narcissist goes through an enormous period of tumult and torture, self-inflicted, when he faces the inevitable outcomes of his actions, choices, and decisions. When he is forced to face the music, to pay the price, to pay the piper, to descend down the path of punitive measures and countermeasures. And then he babyfies, he infantilizes, and he appears on camera, looks you in the eye and says, "Pity me. Look what people have been doing to me. I'm so good. I'm so innocent. I'm so moral. I'm such an angel. And these people keep abusing me, keep hurting me, and I don't deserve it because I'm perfection embodied. I don't deserve it because I don't do anything bad to anyone. Never, ever. I'm innocent, as white as the driven snow." And He looks you in the face and says these things and believes them. They believe these things. And because they believe these things, their conviction, coupled with their charm, passes through, infects you, is communicated to you, and you fall prey to their pathetic, revolting, self-pitying narratives, which have nothing to do with reality, because these are creatures of the dark. They're the ones to create the maelstrom, the black hole that has consumed everyone around them and ultimately themselves.
And every time you responded with concern, with boundaries, with confusion, they felt exposed. Not because you were doing something wrong, but because you were seeing something real. That is what empathy does. It discerns, it penetrates, it recognizes not just behavior, but motive. And when it finds contradiction, it doesn't recoil, it questions. And those questions are unbearable to someone whose identity depends on deception. What they wanted was admiration. What they got was honesty. What they demanded was obedience. What they encountered was courage. And that's what made you the mirror. Not because you tried to fix them, not because you tried to save them, but because your presence made denial impossible.
They become trapped in a spiritual prison of their own making, cut off from the light of divine wisdom. You have seen how they can lie with complete conviction. Where does that come from? It's as if they have lost their connection to truthfulness. You have witnessed how they can hurt you and then act like nothing happened. Their soul is dead. Their conscience has been silenced. They did it to themselves, nobody else. You have experienced how they can twist reality to make you question your own intuition and spiritual perceptions, your discernment. This is because they are operating from this place where they have already shunned light and made the dark trade. They've already chosen their false ego, their false self over their authentic soul. They're dead. There is nobody that you can save. The decision has been made. They are going to maintain this false self at any cost because it's the most important thing to them. Should I say, it's the only thing that they have that is left. If that is taken away, then they will stop existing.
Boundaries are not cruelty. They are divine resistance. The moment you draw a line, especially in the face of manipulation and emotional chaos, you are not harming anyone. That's something narcissists cannot stand. Not because you are doing anything objectively wrong, but because your refusal to bend threatens their control. Boundaries are confrontational to the narcissist's fantasy of superiority and entitlement. They interrupt the script. They signal that their behavior is no longer going to be tolerated, and that in itself is a profound act of spiritual rebellion against manipulation. For someone who has built their identity around dominance and deceit, your boundary is not seen as a healthy limit. It's seen as rejection, as rebellion, as betrayal. But what you're really doing is preserving your integrity. You're saying, this far and no further. You are refusing to be complicit in your own destruction. That's not cruelty, that's clarity. And that clarity doesn't come from anger, it comes from truth. It comes from an awakening. A deep realization that you were not put on this earth to be someone's emotional punching bag, to be guilted into submission, or to be trained to tolerate disrespect just to keep the peace. You weren't being unkind when you stopped explaining yourself. You weren't being selfish when you chose silence over chaos. You weren't being unfair when you walked away instead of arguing endlessly with someone committed to misunderstanding you. These actions may have looked cold to someone who benefited from your warmth, but they were acts of survival. They were acts of reclaiming the space that had been slowly overtaken by someone else's needs, moods, and insecurities. Every boundary you placed was a return to yourself, a declaration that your voice mattered, that your time mattered, that your peace was not up for negotiation. And that's why boundaries are spiritual, because they protect not just the mind but the soul. They are an act of resistance against the forces that seek to dismantle your identity. They are the armor of the emotionally conscious. You're stepping into the authority of someone who knows their value, who no longer derives self-worth from how well they tolerate dysfunction, but from how clearly they can discern what is healthy and what is not. The narcissist sees boundaries as threats because they rely on blurred lines. They thrive where roles are undefined, where guilt and obligation can be weaponized, where your compassion can be turned against you. A boundary removes that power. It creates distance. It forces accountability. It says, I am not afraid to disappoint you if it means protecting myself. You didn't draw boundaries because you stopped caring. You drew boundaries because you finally started caring about yourself. And the fallout that followed, the backlash, the accusations, the isolation, all of it was evidence that you had finally disrupted the cycle. You had finally said enough and meant it. Not as a threat, not as an ultimatum, but as a sacred declaration that your soul was no longer available for exploitation. That is not cruelty. That is sacred defiance. That is truth in motion. That is what it means to love yourself in the face of persistent disrespect. When someone who thrives on illusion and control begins to feel exposed by the presence of someone authentic, they will eventually reach a breaking point. That breaking point is not always dramatic. Sometimes it's slow and subtle, a distancing, a devaluing, a calculated withdrawal of affection and attention. Other times it's sudden, cruel, and confusing. Either way, it isn't your truth they accept or embrace. It's your presence they push away because it reminds them of everything they are unwilling to face within themselves. Rejection from a narcissist is not about you being unworthy. It's about them being unwilling. Unwilling to grow, to evolve, to be held accountable. You did not bring chaos. You brought order to a life built on manipulation. They needed to preserve their false self. And the only way to do that was to remove anything that could expose the cracks. You, simply by existing in truth, were exposing those cracks. You were the light revealing the mold. And when mold is exposed to light, it cannot survive. This is why they often flip the script. They rewrite the story. They frame your boundaries as cruelty. They label your honesty as instability. They attack your credibility because your credibility was the one thing that could destroy the illusion they worked so hard to maintain, and so they discard you. They distance themselves from the very person who offered them the most sincere connection, not because you were flawed, but because you were real. Your presence created an inner conflict in them, the pull toward healing versus the fear of being seen, and more often than not, the fear wins. Because healing would require humility, and humility demands truth. To accept your presence fully, they would have had to admit to themselves that the version of them you saw, the one behind the charm, behind the bravado, was real. That the emptiness you felt wasn't in your mind. That the emotional games weren't a misunderstanding. That the harm wasn't unintentional. And facing that would require a level of courage they never cultivated. So instead of rising to meet the truth, they pushed it away. They rejected you not because you were too much, but because you were too accurate. And accuracy is dangerous in a world of denial. You were the embodiment of everything they feared, not because you were cruel or controlling, but because you couldn't be deceived. You didn't buy into the fantasy. You questioned it. You stood firm in your convictions, and they realized they couldn't manipulate you the way they manipulated others. They couldn't keep the mask on in front of you, so the only option was to exile you from their world. But here's what matters. Their rejection was not a verdict on your identity. It was a confession about their own. When someone cannot accept truth, they will always reject the people who carry it. They will always push away those who live in alignment with values they've abandoned. That rejection isn't failure, it's clarity. It's the confirmation that you were walking in a different direction. You were walking toward wholeness while they were committed to maintaining their wounds. And when paths like that intersect, there is always friction. That friction culminates in a choice. They chose comfort over truth. They chose control over connection. They chose image over intimacy. And the fact that you stood in your truth, even when it cost you the connection, is not something to regret. It's something to honor. Because you didn't betray yourself to keep their world intact. You didn't sacrifice your soul to be accepted by someone who feared their own. You stood where few people stand. in the center of truth, knowing that it might cost you everything, but willing to pay that price rather than become another puppet in their game of deception. Your endurance was a final act of mercy they failed to heed. What you gave, what you tolerated, what you held together in silence, none of it was weakness. It was a rare kind of strength that comes from the deepest parts of the human spirit. You endured not because you didn't see what was happening, but because you hoped. You hoped they would change. You believed in potential. You held out grace longer than anyone else would have. You kept showing up even after your presence was taken for granted. You offered understanding even after misunderstanding was weaponized against you. That kind of endurance isn't foolishness, it's conviction. It's faith in the possibility that love could still reach someone who was slowly closing themselves off from it. And that's where the tragedy lies. Because your endurance wasn't just emotional resilience, it was spiritual offering. It was mercy extended beyond what was deserved. It was your soul saying, I see your brokenness, and I'm still here. Most people run when they see the signs, but you stayed. Not because you didn't have options, but because you had compassion. You weren't blind to the manipulation. You weren't naive to the shifts in behavior. You weren't unaware of the gaslighting, the cycles, the strange silences followed by love bombing and confusion. You saw it all. But still, you didn't walk away immediately. You gave them more time. You gave them more chances. You waited, perhaps prayed that something in them would soften, that something buried deep might respond to the authenticity you were offering. But narcissists don't respond to endurance with gratitude. They interpret it as permission. Every time you forgave, they assumed they had more room. Every time you showed restraint, they believed they had the upper hand. And still, you stayed. Not because you lacked boundaries, but because you were trying to give them the benefit of the doubt. You were trying to show them something different from what the world had shown them. You were trying to be the person they claimed they never had. Your endurance was a message. There's still time to turn this around. There's still time to stop playing the game and start facing the truth. There's still a way to rebuild what's been broken. But they didn't hear it. Or rather, they chose not to. Because mercy terrifies the narcissist more than judgment. Judgment is expected. Condemnation fits their internal narrative. But mercy? Mercy disrupts the identity they've created, the story where they are always the victim or the hero, never the villain. And so instead of responding with humility, they respond with escalation. Instead of acknowledging the gift of your patience, they test it. Instead of softening, they harden. Because to admit they were wrong would mean admitting you were right. And their pride is too fragile to withstand that. And even as you began to draw lines, even as you started to reclaim your space, you still didn't do it with rage. You did it with sorrow. You didn't leave with bitterness in your heart. You left with disappointment. Because deep down, a part of you still wanted to believe in the redemption of that connection, that maybe, just maybe, your endurance would finally open their eyes. That the accumulation of your consistency, your presence, your grace would become undeniable. But it didn't. Not because it wasn't powerful, but because they weren't willing. They saw the line in the sand, and instead of stepping toward reconciliation, they crossed it again. The moment where you realize that even your most sincere efforts were rejected, not because they weren't good enough, but because the person you gave them to didn't want to grow. Your endurance, instead of waking them up, became something they stepped over on their way to further destruction. But that's not your failure. It's not a sign you should have done more. It's evidence that no amount of mercy can save someone who refuses to look at themselves honestly. You gave them time. You gave them presence. You gave them silence when it would have been easier to yell. You gave them understanding when they didn't deserve it. That wasn't for nothing. That was your soul doing everything it could to pull another soul back from the edge. And what they did with that grace is not yours to carry. God doesn't waste pain. He turns it into a warning and a weapon What you walked through was not just suffering, it was refinement. It was the kind of trial that doesn't just bruise the surface, but digs deep into the soul, breaking apart illusions, dependencies, and the lies you believed about yourself. Something was also being built inside of you. Something stronger, wiser, sharper. Pain like that doesn't leave you the same. It remakes you. It reshapes the way you see, the way you discern, the way you respond to the world around you. The narcissist thought they were simply draining you, using you, manipulating you for their own emotional convenience. What they didn't see, and what they still might not understand, is that in trying to break you, they triggered something sacred. They activated a fire they couldn't control. They became the very forge that God used to bring out a version of you they never expected to meet. And that's why your story doesn't end in defeat. Because what was meant to destroy you is now the very evidence of what God can do with a broken heart surrendered to His process. Pain in the hands of the divine becomes purpose. The chaos they caused became the curriculum. The betrayal became the blueprint for better boundaries. The emotional starvation taught you how to feed yourself from within. God didn't let those alarms ring without reason. They were warnings, not just for you, but through you. You became a walking signal, not just a person in pain, but a living warning to the narcissist that their time for control was running out, that the damage they caused does not go unnoticed forever, that the people they try to keep beneath them will not stay there, that truth rises, even if it has to crawl through ashes to do so. And when you walked away or stood firm or refused to let them rewrite your reality, that wasn't just a moment of human defiance. It was spiritual resistance. It was heaven saying, enough. The narcissist may never acknowledge this. They may continue to smear, to distort, to pretend they were the victim all along. But even if they never say it aloud, they felt the shift. And whether they admit it or not, your strength was a warning to them, a final, unspoken message that grace has limits and truth has consequences. But it doesn't stop there, because the pain you endured also became a weapon, not of vengeance, but of wisdom. You now carry something you didn't have before. You carry discernment that can't be faked. You carry a depth of understanding about human behavior, about spiritual warfare, about psychological patterns that textbooks can't teach. And that knowledge, that strength, that healing, it becomes something you take with you into every future relationship. You see. And you see with clarity forged through fire. That clarity protects not only you, but others. Your story becomes a warning for those still entangled, still confused, still believing they are the problem. Your survival speaks for them when they have no words. Your healing gives them hope that they're not crazy, that they're not alone, and that there is life on the other side of the manipulation. God didn't waste your pain. He weaponized it, not to destroy, but to defend, not to retaliate, but to redeem. Every time you speak truth, every time you validate your own voice, every time you stand tall when the past tries to pull you back down, you are wielding the very thing that once wounded you. That is divine strategy.
Zero, nothingness, pure nothingness. And that is worse than death to a narcissist. You need to understand you're dealing with someone who is committed to spiritual deception. You're not talking to their authentic soul. It's not getting through. You're talking to a carefully constructed character who will say whatever they need to say to maintain control of the spiritual narrative. You need to accept this because this understanding will give you clarity. When you allow yourself to fully understand that the narcissist has chosen delusions over divine reality, you will stop expecting them to suddenly become spiritually reasonable or to accept God. When you understand that they have traded their soul's empathy for everything that is so temporary, you will stop expecting them to care about how their actions affect your spirit because they do not care. How they have disconnected from the divine spark within them, and how that spiritual disconnection creates the cold, calculating person you have always dealt with. How can somebody apologize so eloquently, if they do, one day and then repeat the same hurtful behavior the next day as if the apology was never said? How is it possible someone who seems to lack the basic spiritual compass that guides most people? That is because they are demonic at their core. Whether you like this or not, whether you are a believer or not, this is the truth. The narcissist has entered into a spiritual contract that fundamentally changes how they interact with divine truth itself.
The narcissist is a child, truly is. It's not a pretension, it's not an act. The narcissist's mental age, psychological age, is about 2 or 3 years old. The narcissist's episodic memory is compromised. His autobiographical memory. Narcissist is discontinuous and disjointed and kaleidoscopic. There's identity diffusion, identity disturbance. It's a child. When you're with a narcissist, the feeling is that you're with a child. The narcissist gives off a child vibe. And so walking away from the narcissist or being discarded by the narcissist feels like having abandoned a child in need, having betrayed a child, having backstabbed a child. What kind of child? A traumatized child, a child in pain, a crying child, an infant in dire need for succor and help. And here you are, walking away selfishly, egotistically, thoughtlessly. And this, of course, is a source of enormous shame and guilt. But you keep forgetting. Yes, the narcissist is a child, but it's a child trapped in an adult's body. Children by nature are cruel. They're egotistical. They're disempathic. And here you are with a child who has weaponized an adult body. This combination can become ominously life-threatening. You're not abandoning a child. You're abandoning a child hell-bent on your destruction. You're abandoning a child of the corn. You're abandoning a Henry James child. So, this is the child you're abandoning. And yet, something maternal in you, and it doesn't matter if you're a man or a woman, something maternal in you, something protective, something that is triggered by the presence of an infant or a toddler, wouldn't let go. This belief that you're in charge of making other people smile, that you can withhold somehow their happiness or endow them with happiness, that in some way, you are the engineer whose job it is to create, to engender, to foster, to put together an environment within which people can thrive and flourish and reach their maximum potential. This is your job description. This is what you were born to do. And if you fail in this, you feel guilty. Evidently, having been discarded by the narcissist means that you failed to make the narcissist happy. Having discarded the narcissist, on the other hand, means that you're a traitor. You have betrayed the narcissist. We're not talking about guilt. We are talking about a sense of failure or a sense of betrayal, depending on who did the discarding.
Sound crazy, but when you are with a narcissist in any relationship, you absorb their karma. The longer you remain connected to them, the more your energy starts paying off a debt that was never yours to begin with. You see, narcissists are spiritually bankrupt, emotionally stunted, and karmically cursed. Life tries to teach them lessons, but instead of facing them, they pass the consequences onto someone else. You become the scapegoat for their failures, the container for their shame, the one who ends up carrying the weight of everything they refuse to deal with. Their broken dreams, missed chances, and emotional rot get placed on your shoulders. A narcissist sees your light, gift, direction, and they attach themselves to it like a shadow. They feed off your clarity, intuition, your purpose, and slowly your life begins to stall. Your goals get harder to reach, your joy becomes foggy, and emotional energy feels depleted. You start living in a state of confusion that does not belong to you because every time you give them shelter, make excuses for them, you are unknowingly and unwillingly acting as their karmic buffer. Your kindness keeps them protected from consequences. Your presence delays their reckoning. Your love stretches out the time they should have already been facing. They were meant to fail, but your compassion keeps catching them. And perhaps the most dangerous consequence is not emotional, it is spiritual. When you stay too long, narcissists bind you to their punishment timeline. You begin to live cycles of delay, betrayal, rejection, and despair that were never written in your soul's blueprint. You're no longer moving forward in your own life. Their karma begins to shape your reality. Your goals fade into the background. And all the while, they continue playing the victim, convincing the world that you are the problem. This is how narcissists avoid their karma. They hand it to you and call it love. When life hits them with consequences, though, they immediately look for someone to blame. You know how they are. Every single failure in their life somehow becomes your fault. They take zero responsibility and dump everything on you like you're some kind of a cosmic trash can. And you start thinking maybe you really didn't support them enough. This is exactly what they want. They want you to carry their shame so that they do not have to feel it. They become professional blame shifters. Whatever karma is supposed to hit them, they redirect it straight to you. It's like they are wearing some kind of spiritual armor made out of your empathy. Every time the universe tries to teach them a lesson, you are the one who ends up learning it instead. That's impossible, but that's how it is. Which brings me to how they sabotage your wins. Your success makes them sick because it reminds them of everything they cannot be and they are not. When good things start happening in your life, they cannot stand it. They will find ways to ruin it. Your moments create drama right before your big opportunities, steal everything from you, your happiness. I've seen this so many times. They're allergic to your glow because it highlights the darkness. They cannot create their own light, so they try to steal it from you. If they cannot do it, they make sure to dim yours. If they cannot have success, happiness, or peace, then neither can you. The crazy part, they steal it away. It's that simple and that twisted. They come into your life when they are at rock bottom, when they need help. You think you are being kind, but what's really happening is they are positioning themselves to drain everything good from your life. That's how they steal your destiny. They start small, some emotional support. Slowly, they take more and more and do not stop. They steal your energy, resources, and your peace of mind. Opportunities start disappearing. Meanwhile, their life starts improving. That is what destiny swapping means. They become you, take away all your luxuries, all the things that you worked so hard for, make them their own, living your life as it was originally their own, while you somehow suffer for them. They get back on their feet using your foundation. They build their confidence by tearing down yours. They fund their comeback with your downfall. It's like they're literally sucking the good luck out of your life and transferring it to theirs. When they insert themselves so deeply into your life story that they actually hijack your path. The moment you let them in, your divine timing gets disrupted. What was supposed to be your season of growth becomes your season of survival. You didn't know any of that. It just happened as a consequence. They bind themselves to your energy so tightly that you start carrying their burdens, their trauma, and stagnation. You were meant to be flying, but now you are crawling. Why? Because you are carrying their weight. Your opportunities get redirected to them. Your connections become their connections. Your ideas become their ideas. It's like they do not have their own spiritual GPS, so they steal yours. They watch how you move through the world, how you make decisions, how you trust your intuition. Then they copy it all while leaving you feeling lost and confused. The crazy part, they'll say, "You have been copying me." It's because they are literally stealing your essence, as I said, and leaving you with their emptiness. The most twisted part is how they reverse the roles. They make you feel like you are the toxic one. They take all your good qualities and claim them as their own, then project all that darkness onto you. Suddenly you are the selfish one. Suddenly you are the dramatic one, the unstable one. They are just the innocent victim trying to deal with your chaos. You know you are not this person they are describing. They gaslight you into believing you are carrying all the negative energy when you really are just carrying theirs on top of your own. When you are connected to someone with heavy karma, you literally start catching their spiritual fleas. Bad things that never happened to you before start happening. Your luck changes, your timing gets off, your relationships suffer, your health declines. It's like you are living under their curse instead of your own blessing. The scariest part is how your own karma gets delayed while their gets fast tracked through your goodness. You are supposed to be receiving the fruits of your labor, your kindness, hard work, and your positive energy. Instead, they are receiving it while you are getting hit with the consequences of their negative energy. Every moment of compassion you give them is another moment of blessing they do not deserve, while you suffer consequences you did not earn. Your job is not to be anyone's karmic shield. Let that sink in. Your purpose is not to delay their spiritual lessons. Your love is not meant to be a buffer between toxic people and the universe justice. When you finally break free from these energy vampires, watch how quickly your life starts flowing again. Like I said, watch how your opportunities return, your peace restores, joy comes back. That is your real energy returning to you. That is your authentic karma kicking in. Remember, you cannot save someone from their own actions. As I say, they are their biggest enemy. The only thing that you can do in this situation is you can save yourself, and that is what you ought to do.
You lose touch with yourself. This is what happens because they have no clue who they are. They're disconnected from themselves. And they wear all of these different masks. And yeah, it's very easy for them to lie and to act like nothing happens. It's very easy for them to do that. They have no clue who they are. They have no clue about reality because they had to tell themselves so many lies to make it permissible and to make themselves feel better. So they have no clue who they are.